And then this one,
Hey, you know what?
Testing.
This was to look at the audience when they're answering the questions. So I just told him I'm going to find the other one.
Good evening. May I have your attention up here? And can you hear me? No. Okay.
it's on. It just needs more volume.
Okay.
There you go.
Got it? Excellent. Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Susan Byerly. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of the Dayton area. I'd like to welcome you all to this forum tonight. This is for the 42nd Congressional District. I'd like to thank Miamisburg school system for letting us have this forum here. We are going to do this tonight. We have questions that we're going to have from our moderators here, and each candidate will get questions. We'll go from candidate to candidate, and they'll have 2 minutes to answer each question. We're going to start with Zach, and he will get his series of questions from the moderators, and then we're going to turn to questions from the audience. So if you have questions that you want addressed to Zach, just hold up your hand, and a league member will give you a card. You can write down your question. If you've got a question for them to pick up, hold up your hand. They'll grab the question and bring them up here so that the moderators can ask that after they get done with their question answer session. Then we'll move on to the other set of candidates, and we'll do the same thing. They'll go through a series of questions. They'll get 2 minutes to answer any question presented to them, and during that time, the members of the audience can be writing down their own questions to send up here, and then the moderators will present those questions to the candidates. So I hope that all makes sense. It's a fair way to do it. Before we move on to this, I want to just mention one other thing. On the May ballot, there is an issue 1. You may have heard something about it. As you know, the League of Women Voters does not endorse any political party. We don't endorse any political candidates, but from time to time we do endorse an issue. And issue 1 addresses the way districts are drawn and tries to address the issue of gerrymandering. And we think that it's a good solution, and we encourage you to vote yes on issue 1 in May. So, and if you need more information about it, you can go to the League website, and we have links to all kinds of information on candidates and issues. So I think that's it, and we're ready to start the debate, or the forum.
Hi, I'm Lynn.
I'm supposed to introduce you guys. Yeah, well, thanks everybody for coming out. I'm Anthony Shoemaker with the Dayton Daily News and WHIO. I want to thank Miamisburg High School for hosting us here and the League of Women Voters for working with us on another debate. We've talked to all the candidates in this race in our voter guide, so if you want to look at that to get more information, it's at vote.daytondailynews.com, and it'll be up through Election Day. Our moderators here are Lynn Halsey of the Dayton Daily News and Jason Michaels with WHIO Radio.
Hello. We're going to start with Jason asking a question, and we're just going to kind of go back and forth. And don't forget to write down questions that you have.
As we get ready to start, I do want to mention, out of the interest of full disclosure, I'm a 1974 graduate of Miamisburg High School. And part of a group of students who back in the day hauled a 30-foot galvanized steel pipe up the side of this building to install a radio antenna on the roof. So it's fun to be here.
Okay, great.
Also, to introduce Zach Dickerson, he's a Democratic candidate. There is another Democrat who is not here, Autumn Kern. So here we go.
To Zach and all of our candidates here, welcome. We're glad you're here tonight. Okay, here we go. According to a ranking from U.S. News and World Report, Ohio ranks 40th out of 50 states overall. We rank 41st in education, 40th in quality of life. And yet our best number in those particular rankings, 18th, is in crime and corrections. What does Ohio need to do to improve those numbers?
I can come sit over by y'all.
Now we've got the cameras all settled.
All right. Well, so that's a really big question, right? Ohio's economy has been a little bit sluggish. As far as college affordability too, 45th. I mean, we have some real challenges, and so I think a part of that is finding new ways to grow our economy. And one of the things that I really support doing, did you know, I mean, with wind energy alone, green energy is the innovative new frontier of where jobs can be created in this country. And the last report that I saw is that we are missing out on over $1 billion of economic development because we don't have a legislature that will support initiatives to go into that industry. And I think that's a mistake. Indiana, it gets just as much wind as we do, and they produce 3 times more wind energy than we do. And I think that's got to change. So speaking about jobs, I think that's something that we can do. And when you bring in jobs and give people a good living, they're less likely to be involved in crime when you have lower rates of poverty. So that's a win-win, folks. You get jobs and you get lower crime rates, and you're doing something good for the environment. So that's a win-win-win. So that's one of the things that I think we should focus on.
What would you say is the most important issue facing specifically this district, and what would you do to solve it, and how would you pay for your solution?
Okay. The most important issue facing this district, ladies and gentlemen, there's not one. if I had to say the things that I'm concerned about fall under an umbrella, they're the things that are kitchen table issues that affect everybody in this district, like your taxes. One of the things, this is not an exciting issue, I hope no one falls asleep, but it's called the Local Government Fund. Part of the reason the roads are so bad here in Miamisburg, and part of the reason schools are struggling with funding, is because the legislature in Ohio cut the Local Government Fund, I think it was in about 2008, to close a budget hole at the state level. Well, when they did that, the money that was coming to the states funded those kinds of basic services, first responders, those kinds of things. So I know that's not very exciting, but restoring the local government fund is something that we need to do to be able to fill potholes. And if you drove here tonight, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So that would be the first thing that I would fix, is working on local government funding.
Okay, there's no question that there is great value in a quality education, but some notables, such as Mike Rowe, the former host of the TV show Dirty Jobs, notes that in 2017, of 5.6 million available jobs, 75% of them do not require a four-year college degree, and yet it seems as though some in the state want to continue to push students toward those four-year colleges. What is your take on this? Is a four-year degree the right thing for everyone?
We have a really great organization here called the Miami Valley Career Technical Center. Has anybody heard of that? They do some really great work. I was knocking on doors this last weekend, and I talked to a teacher there, and she told me, I've got a 17-year-old student that can listen to your car drive up and tell you what's wrong with it without even looking at it. I think that's awesome. We need to encourage more people to go into those kinds of trade-skilled positions. And so no, to answer your question, a four-year degree is not right for everybody. And as another example, you know, the last statistic I saw, by 2020, 64% of Ohio jobs will require at least a two-year degree, some minimum kind of education, but only 37% of people are going to have that. We need to work on education in Ohio because there's a lot of great things about our state, but we are undereducated in that sense. We need to do better, and I think we can.
In the last decade, the state legislature has made tax cuts for businesses a centerpiece of its economic growth plan. They use taxpayer dollars to privatize the economic development with Jobs Ohio. But Ohio's job growth lags other states, and Ohio's economic health ranks 32nd on that same U.S. News and World Report data that was cited by Jason. Is it time for a new approach, and what would you change if elected?
All right. Well, who doesn't love tax cuts? I mean, I can't say anything bad about that, but I think there's probably an argument to be made for saying we went a little overboard with some of the things that we've done in this state. Right now, the legislature's put together something called the Tax Expenditure Review Committee. And they're looking at about 129 different tax breaks that we have in Ohio to determine whether or not they've been beneficial in growing the economy. So I think before we layer on any more new tax cuts, we should let that committee do its work to determine the economic impact the existing cuts have had. But I guess additionally, I would say this. There are areas in the budget that we can look at. We give a $42 million tax cut as a credit to movie studios to come here and make films. We give a $30 million tax credit to people that have fractional ownership in private jet aircraft. Those are things we could probably look at. If we want to have a a healthy state that is attractive for new businesses to start in, we have to invest in our state. So I support, there are things that we can do to support small businesses, like a microloan program. There are smart investments we can make with taxes. But I think we need to look at our revenue that's coming in and where we want to make investments and set those priorities.
Oh, there. All right, very good. Many thanks to the sound guy. All right. Politicians have come and gone stressing the need for better funding for education in Ohio. And yet, teachers still seem to be reaching into their own pockets now and then to provide students with the educational experience that they need. What, in your view, should be done to make sure all teachers at all levels have what they need to educate their students?
Real quickly, I realized I didn't answer part of Lynn's question there about Jobs Ohio as well. One of the problems with Jobs Ohio is that our state auditor doesn't have the ability to do his job and audit it and look and see how our tax dollars are being spent. So if we want to make sure that our money's being spent correctly to grow our economy, we need to allow the auditor to do his job. So I'm sorry, paying teachers. I think, ladies and gentlemen, this is as plain on the nose on my face. You've all read the news stories about ECOT. We have spent close to $1 billion on charter schools, and a lot of that went to ECOT, and that money got wasted. And that money came out of public schools. I was out knocking on doors probably about a month ago, and I met a nice couple in their driveway, and the young lady told me she used to be very against charter schools. But then she started working at one and realized what good work they were doing. And so now she's a supporter of them, not just because they're employer, because she's seen hands-on. They're doing good work. I'm not opposed to charter schools, but I'm opposed to how we fund them. And hurting public schools in order to do it is the wrong way.
Medical marijuana will begin being sold in Ohio in September. Do you think the program needs any changes as it's implemented, or does it need expanded in any way, including adding recreational marijuana?
Where are the softballs, you guys? Come on. All right. I have seen studies, yes, that say there's good clinical research to support medical marijuana. And especially with the problem we're facing with opioids right now, I think that medical marijuana has shown some promise in helping people beat that addiction. So I support that. I don't have a problem with it. As far as recreational marijuana, you know, that's a little harder to say. I went to law school in Denver, Colorado. And while I was there, back in 2007, 2008, was when the whole legalization movement started. So they were doing presentations in my law school all the time talking about how it was a safer choice than alcohol and the impact it would have on your brain. And a lot of people, rightfully and understandably so, were a little cautious. I don't know if that's right for us. Well, Colorado ended up legalizing it eventually in 2014. And a lot of the people that were afraid of the slippery slope and it having an impact on people driving under the influence and people using heroin or whatever being a gateway drug, a lot of that didn't come to fruition. What did come was tax revenue. In, was it 20, I wrote it down so I could remember to tell you if it ever came up. The tax revenue grew exponentially. This last year in 2016, they had $200 million in revenue. Is it the right thing for Ohio? I don't know. I'll have a conversation with the voters about it, but if it does happen, one thing I will make real sure we do if I'm elected is earmark that money to go to something important like opioid treatment or schools, and not just let it go into the general fund where it can be spent on whatever folks decide. We need to earmark that money.
History has shown over the years that when someone has decided to take a serious action with a weapon, that there's often little that can be done to stop it. The wave of violence in schools is shocking whenever and wherever it happens. What steps do you feel can be taken to lessen the chances of such incidents happening?
There's something really simple that we can do that I think just about every single Republican and Democrat would agree on. I know this gun issue is really hot, and some people feel really strongly about it. But as I've been talking to Republicans, one of the things I really want to try to do if I'm elected is to find common ground with people. And this is one of the things I think we can all agree on. In Ohio, our background check system was, up till 2014, I believe it was done on paper. And it was a really slow process, and not everybody was submitting paperwork from somebody that had a conviction and shouldn't have a firearm into the background check system. And so as I've talked to Republicans, I've heard them say, we don't need any new laws, we need to enforce the ones that are on the books. Okay, I'll meet you halfway and I'll start there. Let's focus on the laws that are on the books. With that background check system, in 2014 we created an electronic system to allow courts to submit that information. We finally got in gear. The problem was the electronic system that we created was not compatible with what was at the lower court system. So of the 350 plus courts we have, only 47 are using that electronic system. And for a lot of them, it's because their technology isn't compatible. So if we want to enforce the laws that are on the books, let's do that. Let's fund the technology upgrades necessary for those lower courts to use the electronic system so that we can have full, comprehensive background checks. And I think that would go a long way to doing what you're talking about.
On the issue of guns, there have been multiple restrictions, or actually reductions in restrictions on gun laws in Ohio. And there are calls in some places for more restrictions rather than the direction Ohio has gone. What are your views about increasing restrictions such as banning assault-style weapons, bump stocks, and high-capacity magazines, or, and you've already answered this part, or expanded background checks? So if you could focus on the banning of the types of guns.
So let me say this before I start. This can be hard for me to talk about as a Democrat because I've been called all kinds of names, from a squirrel hippie to a Nazi. Now, I don't know what a squirrel hippie is, but I don't think it was a compliment. In talking about guns, I come from a hunting family. I've been hunting with my dad since I was a teenager. I support gun ownership. But there is a place for reasonable gun restrictions in this country. There is a place for common sense restrictions on the Second Amendment, just like we have on the First. So would I support a ban on bump stocks? Yes. Would I support a ban like I believe Governor Kasich does on armor-piercing bullets? Yes. And I do support a ban on sort of weapons like the AR-15 or the AK-47, assault-style weapons. But I want to have an honest conversation with you about that. It's not as easy to just say to ban assault weapons. In defining what an assault weapon is, that's very difficult. Is it the number of magazines in the round? Is it the rate of fire? Is it the length of the barrel, the caliber of the bullet? There are complex considerations that go into that so that you can regulate those firearms, the assault-style firearms, that you want to find that line to where you're not also eliminating hunting rifles. So if we can strike that balance, I will work with people on both sides of the aisle to do it, because I think there are a lot of folks that agree weapons that are designed to take human life, military-style rifles, might not belong in the hands of folks out in the public, and that's why we've seen places like Dick's Sporting Goods and others taking them off the shelves.
Communities around Ohio continue to argue the merits and issues with red light cameras in the state. Some believe these to be important to battling aggressive driving and accidents. Others see them as a means by which for municipalities to collect fines and increase revenues. What is your stand on these cameras?
Well, I've never been asked that before. I'll be completely honest with you. Nobody's ever brought it up to me. I understand the arguments for why people think that they're a good idea, because it's a way to not have to have a warm body there to make sure that people are obeying traffic laws and that safety's enforced. But I also understand the other side of the argument. They sometimes malfunction, and you can be cited for a ticket when you weren't doing anything wrong, and then you've got to go to court and fix it to get that taken care of. So honestly, I can't answer that question without doing a little more research about it.
All right, it's time for you to make the closing remarks. Actually, we were supposed to let you make opening ones, so make your opening remarks now. The panel apologizes.
That's all right. I'll just tell you in the closing what I was going to tell you in the opening. If you, I could tell you a lot about myself, ladies and gentlemen. I'm 38 years old, and I know I don't look it, but I'm the oldest person running in this race. I've got a law degree from the University of Denver. There's a lot that's on my resume that I could talk to you about. But if you want to know something about me, you need to know something about my great-grandmother, Bernice. When I was growing up, she was my best friend. She was my only friend, but that's besides the point. I was an awkward child. I love that woman more than anything on this earth. She passed when I was 16. And at her funeral, I heard a story about her that really stuck with me. She used to live in an apartment complex, and she was on the first floor. And one summer, some college kids moved into the unit above her. And they did what college kids do. They made noise at all hours of the night, and it was keeping her awake. So she decided to do something about it, and she had two options. She could call somebody and complain, or she could deal with it herself. So she decided to deal with it herself. She marched up those stairs, she knocked on their door, and when they answered, do you know what she said? Hi, my name's Bernice. Here's a plate of cookies. She had a conversation with them. And after that, not only were those young men more respectful about the noise, one of them came down every week and took out her trash. Ladies and gentlemen, in the world of politics, there will be a lot of noisy people that live above me. I know, I've met some of them. But like my grandmother, I'm not going to complain about those people. I'm going to talk to them. Last December, the Montgomery County Republican Party had a Christmas party. It was open to the public, so I went to it. I was probably the only Democrat there. But I did it because I wanted to break bread with people on the other side of the aisle. We're not enemies. We are all in this together. And if you elect me to send me to Columbus, that's the attitude I'm going to take with me. I will work with people on both sides of the aisle to find smart policy to move this state forward. We can do better in Ohio. We need more civility and bipartisanship in our politics. And if you elect me to represent you, that's exactly what I'll do.
So do we have some questions from the audience coming? Oh, we're out of time?
Yeah, so I think we're going to switch now.
Okay.
Thank you, Zach Dickerson.
If anybody does have questions that you couldn't talk to me now, I'll stick around after if there's something you want to ask me.
Like if you ask a question or whatever, you guys have to keep it going. You guys have to let us know when it's time for questions. Okay. Oh, I know. I'm sorry. Yeah. Because we're just doing such a good job.
questions one by one, and then we'll take some audience questions for the group. So here we go. We'll start with State Representative Antoni. There have been multiple tax cuts in Ohio, and some people think more cutting needs done. Others say taxes have been cut too much and necessary services are not getting enough funding. What is your position on additional tax cuts? And if you are going to cut more, how would you cover the things that that money now pays for?
Sure. Well, thank you, Lynn, and thank you to the League of Women Voters and to Cox Media and Miamisburg High School for supporting this forum and putting it on. You know, look, I'm proud of the record we've had in the last 3.5 years on tax cuts. We've cut taxes by about $1 billion in Ohio without raising any other taxes to cut those costs. But what we did in the first budget is we used the surplus to cut taxes, right? Government should only spend what it takes in, and everything else should be put back to the people. In this last budget, where there actually was not a surplus, we didn't cut taxes, nor did we raise them. And that's the philosophy I think we should use. If the state is running a surplus, it should be returned to the taxpayers, because it's not the state's money, it's the people's money.
Hi, my name is Marcus Reck, and I too want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Thank you for putting this on for everybody. And I agree that the surplus was used in a good way, but I think that government should absolutely focus on the things that it's supposed to focus on: infrastructure, law enforcement, safety, those sorts of things. So if we're doing tax credits, as Zach said, giving tax credits to movie production companies, that could be taken away from roads. We should make sure that we fill the potholes at least. And I think that we have to make sure that we take care of our communities. That's very important. I'm a Republican, but I'm an American first, and I want to make sure that we take care of our people.
Could you repeat the question, please?
There have been multiple tax cuts in Ohio, and some people think more cutting needs done. Others say taxes have been cut too much and necessary services are not getting enough funding. What is your position on additional tax cuts? And if you do want to have more cuts, how would you cover the costs that are now being covered, by that revenue?
Sure. Something that Zach talked about was the local government fund. One of the things that led to a surplus on the state level is the fact that through the last few years, they cut the local government fund, which means communities like Miamisburg received millions of dollars in our revenue cut, which caused us to have to cut programs or find creative ways to make up for that money. And while I am always in favor of cutting taxes, I don't think that we should be doing it at the expense of our communities, and I think that that's something that should be revisited. I know I was having a conversation with someone today about the local tax fund and or the local government fund. And the argument is, well, where will, if we're going to give that back to the communities, where will the money come from? Are we going to raise taxes? Because we already used that surplus to cut taxes for, on a state level. But I think it's something worth looking into. I'm always in favor of reducing taxes because, and you'll see all three of us are very conservative, very pro-life, in favor of the Second Amendment, anti-tax. But I think we have to be careful about how much we're cutting services, and I think that that's something that we need to rely on the people to find out, and that's one of the things that we've done here in Miamisburg. We faced some serious budgetary constraints, loss in revenue. Part of that was the local government fund, part of that was the estate tax, which I think we're, getting rid of the estate tax was something that I think was good. Oh, okay. That I think, was a good thing to look into. I think that that was the right move for the state to make. However, it affected us on a local level, and I think that we need to really consider the effects that we're going to have when it comes to those things, and we need to go to the people and ask them, do you want to pay more taxes? Do you want us to cut taxes? Are you willing to lose services? That's something that we did in Miamisburg. We were considering.
We have our timekeeper sitting here. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but when she's got her, you're holding up red, right? So you have to pay it.
Yellow. She was holding up yellow.
Yeah, it wasn't explained at the beginning, but.
Do I still have 30 seconds left?
30 seconds left, and then.
Gotcha.
When the yellow is up, it's 30 seconds.
Right. Right. Anyway, one of the things that we decided to do in Miamisburg was go on the ballot and ask people what do you guys want us to do? We're in a situation where we're out of money. Do you want us to raise taxes? Are you willing to pay more on a local income tax level? Or do you want us to cut services? And they decided overwhelmingly that they wanted to raise taxes 0.25%. And because of that, we were able to move forward with some of the things we had planned. Oh, I guess I could go down. Is this the new mic? Okay. You can have back. Okay.
Okay, let me ask you a question I asked your Democratic colleague there. According to a ranking from U.S. News and World Report, Ohio ranks 40th overall out of 50 states. We rank 41st in education and 40th in quality of life. And yet our best number in the rankings, 18th, is in crime and corrections. What does Ohio need to do to improve those numbers?
Well, unfortunately, there are some worse numbers too, obviously with the heroin epidemic, with infant mortality, and a few other areas that Ohio needs to improve on. And so, we have a lot of work to do in a lot of different areas. On the jobs front, since you referenced that, obviously Ohio for a while was trending positively and has since sort of stagnated perhaps in the last year. That I really attribute to a workforce issue now, where we have 18,000 open jobs in the 14-county Dayton region. Number one open job in the Dayton region is truck drivers. Number two is nurses. I'm the vice chair of the Higher Education Workforce Development Committee. I was named Community College Legislator of the Year in 2015, Career College Legislator of the Year in 2016. I really think that supporting and reforming our community and career colleges is the answer to this jobs question and to this workforce question. We really have to take it to the next level and help people get the skills needed in an affordable manner and in a timely manner in order to get into these jobs where that are available, that are open. And so there, again, on the other areas, John Husted, Secretary of State, likes to say, if we were number one in jobs and education, we would not be number one in the heroin epidemic, right? And I really believe that is true. And a good education provides a good job. And that, I believe, has to be the focus.
Yeah, I agree that we have a lot of work to do. The heroin problem is, however, mostly man-made. There are too many drugs being prescribed, and there are too many people who are lobbyists and are saying that we need to keep this going, we need to keep this revenue stream going. It's big pharma. They don't care about you, they don't care about me, they just want to make money. And back in the 90s and the 80s, things were, I wasn't even alive back then, but things were different. 28 going on 19, so. But things were different. We didn't prescribe as many painkillers at one time. Now people get sent home with these huge bottles. And I understand there's people who need it and they can handle it, and we should make sure that we consider those people too. But it is man-made. And when you talk about education, education isn't going to matter if we're not putting our people first, if the jobs aren't being given to citizens. And I've worked in the defense contract staffing industry, and there's a lot of green card holders who are taking the jobs there. And we have to look at the universities too, the H-1B scandal at Wright State. That's a big problem. We have to make sure that we put our people first, because if we don't, it's not going to matter how many community colleges we have or tech centers we have. The jobs are going to be low wage, and they're going to go, they're going to be outsourced.
Thanks. One of the things that we're really proud of, and some of my council members are here in the back with me from Miamisburg. Miamisburg has consistently, for the last 9 years, been getting better every year. We've been doing really good at bringing business to Miamisburg. We have developed the Byers Road Corridor. We've developed business out by the Dayton Mall, and of course the downtown, which I hope most of you have had a chance to visit. We get new, great business there almost on a monthly basis almost. And that's something that I'm really proud of. I think that we have done a lot of the right things in Miamisburg to make up for lost revenue, that we've been able to bring business here and fund things that we wanted to be able to fund and not cut services. And I think that those same policies and that same approach is something to take to Columbus and to be able to apply to Ohio on a statewide level. Something that Mr. Antoni said, if we were number one in jobs, we wouldn't be number one in heroin. I couldn't disagree with that more. I've spent the last 7 years working with addicts and understanding why it is that they are becoming addicted to things. I think Marcus, touched on something that was important, and that's big pharma. But people don't become addicted to drugs because they don't have jobs. And I think that just shows kind of being out of touch with the real issue. Drug addicts are members of our community, and I think, to the credit of a lot of people who've been working in that industry, we're changing the stigma, we're changing the way that we approach that, but there is so much work to be done. And I think it's one thing to sit in an auditorium and listen to statistics and try to come up with a Band-Aid answer. There's something else when you're walking hand in hand with people who are suffering, and you're understanding their life, their challenges, and you see where the system is broken and where it's working. And I think when you experience that on a first-hand basis, you can understand how to take that and create policy that works, policy that's effective and actually does positively affect the people of this community. From what I have seen on the ground level, heroin is probably, and drug addiction is our greatest thing that we need to really focus on and fight.
The Medicaid expansion brought health insurance to about 685,000 Ohioans who made too much money for regular Medicaid and not enough to buy insurance through the Affordable Care Act. It has been controversial, and what would you do if you are elected if the question once again comes before the legislature as to whether to end or freeze the Medicaid expansion?
Well, thank you, Lynn, for the question. As you know, in the last budget, I voted to freeze enrollment in Medicaid expansion. However, to me, that's really not, the issue. I think that, Medicaid is a necessary service for those who need it. And the question really shouldn't be the enrollment or disenrollment of people. We should take care of people who need the care. The real question should be is helping those folks be provided with the tools and skills necessary to get up and off of public assistance. To promote them through workforce development, through job training, et cetera. CareSource, obviously a large employer in the Dayton area and our state's largest Medicaid managed care provider, has a great service called Life Services, where they will help their members, those on CareSource, on Medicaid, get the skills training necessary in order to advance their employment. And the important part to remember about this program, which I'm working right now to scale up across the state, is that someone who is on Medicaid is likely on other forms of public assistance. Okay, and while they may not be able to get up and off of Medicaid, maybe we can, get them the resources necessary to get up and off of another form of public employment. I know Republicans are often attacked that we don't, care for, those in need, and that saddens me because I really do believe that, people who need the help should get it. But that said, I also don't know, any third grader who says, my dream is to be on public assistance. Their dream is to get into a good career, to achieve their American dream. And so our focus should really be on helping them achieve that.
So the Medicaid expansion was controversial because Governor Kasich went around the legislature and he decided to act like a dictator and do whatever he wants and use the controlling board to pass that. And that's a problem. We can't have that in a democratic republic. So I don't agree with that, and I think there are people that do need help, and when they do need help, what do? And we should have some sort of safety net at the end of the day for people. But the problem is that it's the healthcare industry. Direct primary care is a way to circumvent the insurance companies, go around them, and deal directly with your doctor. I think that's something we should talk about. I think that's something we should explore, and if we can look into that, we can bypass the insurance companies, and we can make sure that people can get affordable rates negotiated directly with their doctor.
It's a tough question to answer in 2 minutes. I think Medicaid expansion took a broken system and broke it even further. For 2 years, I ran a pediatric dental office in Centerville. 60% of our patients were on CareSource, and so I have seen firsthand how the Medicaid expansion has affected people that were in need of care. The people who were on Medicaid originally, and like I said, I need more than 2 minutes to be able to really explain this, but we took a population of people who needed help, and we took the providers that were providing that help for them, and we expanded the population a lot with the same amount of providers. So now the people who really needed to have that help have much less access to it. They struggle being able to get appointments, being able to see providers, because now there are 10 people for one appointment instead of maybe 2 people trying to get one appointment. From my experience working in the healthcare industry, I have not seen that benefit very many people. I think that, I mean, there's a lot to say there, but it was the wrong move for Ohio to make. Here's some statistics for you if you are interested in how much it's costing us. 52% of Ohio's budget is spent on Medicaid. The state, in trying to fix the opiate addiction issue, has put over $1 billion into the Medicaid system for treatment that, by and large, does not work and is not effective. We have a growing responsibility. When we expanded Medicaid, we took a lot of money from the federal government, but as the years progress, we have an increased responsibility financially to that, which is going to cost us billions of dollars on a broken system. I think there needs to be a lot of work there to reverse what's been done and fix. I mean, Medicaid expansion is not what's wrong with our healthcare system. There's a lot of things wrong with our healthcare system, but it only took, like I said, a broken system and broke it even further. I'm sad that the Republicans in office felt like it was the responsibility to pass that. I know, like Marcus said, Governor Kasich pushed that through. But before Mr. Antoni voted to freeze Medicaid, he voted to pass Obamacare, which led us to this in the first place.
Well, educational issues do not only exist at the college level. Some students graduate some schools, unable to easily read or write a paragraph, and apparently consider copy, cut, and paste to be a form of writing. And yet, having these basic skills are essential not only to graduate, but to make it in life. How can we improve K-12 education so we can ensure that when our students graduate, they have these skills?
Yeah, absolutely. K-12 education is extremely important, and I too am a graduate of Miamisburg High School. Ate lunch in this very auditorium every day for 4 years, and you know it's very, very important. Now, obviously, we have to fund public education at an adequate level. You know, I understand the local government fund has been brought up, and a couple other things have been brought up. The controlling board, you know. Each of those things were before the time I was in the legislature, including when public education was cut by about 9% in the 2011 budget. In the last 2 budgets, we have actually increased the base funding for K-12 education in both of those budgets. Now, depending on some of the rule changes, some districts did unfortunately go down in this last budget. In the previous budget, you know, every school district was protected. So funding is obviously very important, but there's also, you know, a lot of other issues. Summer reading is one of them. I put forth a budget amendment in this last budget that would have created a summer reading program that would have shipped books to students' homes to give them that access. Unfortunately, you know, there are students who perhaps can't get to a library because, you know, their parents are working or, you know, other issues. And so, you know, I think summer reading is a huge issue. You know, over-testing is another one. We've cut 3 to 4 tests in the last 3 years, with hopefully more to come. And the other thing that I'm very passionate about is we keep changing the rules of the games on our students. Every single year, whether it is a graduation requirement, a test, teacher evaluation, et cetera, we change the rules of the game every year. You know, Republicans, as Republicans, we say, you know, we need to give businesses certainty. I think we also need to give students certainty. We need to stop changing the rules of the game every year and give our students a chance to succeed.
Education is very important to me. I had a hard time in school, just the format of it, and I think we need to individualize curriculums, learning styles. Education is something that we can't take lightly. It is K-12 is a free education system. I think it was Bernie Sanders was talking about making college free, but we already have one. Let's just beef up what we have, K-12, and make sure that everybody has some sort of skill that is marketable when they graduate high school. And I think we go back to how it used to be. You used to be able to come out of high school, and you used to be able to get a good paying job. And unfortunately, it's really hard now. I'd like to see additional guidance for students as well. And when you're talking about like kids not being able to read and write, there is some of that too, but there is some of the wrong priorities. I mean, I've never had to write an APA paper in my working career. Has anyone here had to write an APA format in their job? I mean, okay, a few people, so. But I think we need the right priorities, and if we can do that, if we can make sure that we're teaching the right things, adding technology, trades to the core curriculum, then we'll be good to go.
One of the biggest problems with our education system right now is that the control of our education statewide is centered in Columbus. I think that if we could return control of education to the local level and our local school boards, I think that's probably the first place to start. You know, there have to be a level of metrics and some kind of way to measure how we're doing, but I think and I think everybody in this room has probably heard the phrase, we're teaching to the test. I think that teachers feel like they're held hostage now to that because they risk, if they don't meet the standards that Columbus has set forth, that the state could come in and take over their system. And so, you know, I was talking with somebody this morning who's a consultant for education, for public education, and he said that you know, in Dayton, we used to have a co-op, a Patterson co-op, and it lost, I mean, it's pretty much been dismissed because they weren't being able to use that school and that program to meet their test requirements. And because they were so focused on meeting their test requirements, things like a co-op, which could have made people ready for work as soon as they graduated from high school, has been abolished. I think that, you know, taking away control at a state level is probably the first thing to do. We have to quit focusing on everyone going to college. I mean, I think that's something that's been brought up several different times tonight, and fortunately, I think it's something that every candidate in this race agrees on. Right now, the state wants every student to take an ACT to the point where they will pay for the first one. Of every student, and you're measured on a high school level, you're measured on your metrics whether or not every student in your school takes an ACT. Some kids are going to go to the military, some kids are going to go to vocational school, some kids don't have any interest in college, and I think that we have to change the way we're looking at education in Ohio if we want to see a real change.
All right, I think we'll do one more question and then take audience questions. So I will ask you one that we also asked Zach. The state legislature has made tax cuts as one of its centerpieces for economic growth, and they also privatized economic development using taxpayer dollars that went to Jobs Ohio. But Ohio's job growth lags other states. The state's economic health ranks 32nd, according to the U.S. News and World Report. Is it time for a new approach in Ohio, and if so, what would you change if elected?
Well, thank you for the question. I think I addressed this a little bit earlier, but we'll reiterate a few things. You know, I am, again, supportive of tax cuts if, you know, we have the resources to do this. You know, another area in order to encourage job growth, we've talked about workforce development tonight, we've talked about tax growth. You know, we also need to talk about the regulatory issue. You know, there's a bill right now affecting the cosmetology industry that would lessen the burdens on that industry in order to become a cosmetologist. So it is a little bit of a workforce issue, but the cosmetology industry, people who cut your hair, I go to Great Clips, you know, down in Austin Landing, there simply just do not have enough people able to go into that industry. It takes 1,500 hours right now to become a cosmetologist, which is more hours than what it takes to become a police officer. And it is just way too high of a standard, and it is very restrictive. It's economically restrictive. And so, you know, this bill would address that, but there are many, many other areas where the regulatory burden, whether it's through the unemployment insurance issue or the workforce compensation issue, where employers and thereby their employees are burdened from growing when they want to grow.
I just want to say that privatizing organizations like Jobs Ohio can often backfire because people are making money off taxpayer dollars. And that's happened a lot with different organizations. And I like what Representative Antoni talks about when he talks about occupational licensing. That is a problem. It keeps people from entering the workforce. And I got my real estate license, and we did, I don't know, 120 hours of coursework, and the test was completely different. There's barely anything in the courses that was on the test. So that is a problem. We need to look at that. I actually had a lady call me about occupational licensing changes, and I got her a meeting with the Americans for Prosperity director on May 3rd. And so they're going to try to work with the legislature. That organization works on issues to try to get that resolved. So I think we should look at that, and we should be careful when we privatize these organizations, because there are people who can make a lot of money, and it's millions of dollars. It's a lot of money. So it's unfortunate that the government is a way to become rich now. It shouldn't be that way. It should be a way to actually provide services for people who pay taxes.
I want to make sure I understand the question. Would you repeat it again, please?
In the last decade, the state legislature has made tax cuts for businesses a centerpiece of its economic growth plan and used taxpayer dollars to privatize economic development through Jobs Ohio. But Ohio's job growth lags the country, and Ohio's economic health ranks 32nd, according to U.S. News and World Report. Is it time for a new approach, and if so, what would you change if elected?
Yeah, well, clearly it's time for a new approach. We have been consistently above the unemployment average for the nation for years now. I think that some of the things that Marcus talked about are right. I think that it goes back to encouraging people to seek a different path after high school, because not everybody is university ready. Not everybody is going to be a good student in a university or needs a liberal arts degree. I think that if we were a state that encouraged vocational training, we would see more of those jobs here. It's unfortunate that we haven't made that change yet. But I think that they're both right, and that we need to probably change some of the regulations. I think one of the things that we've done in Miamisburg to bring business here is offer incentives to businesses that will grow. That if they come to Miamisburg and we offer them some money to help them relocate here, to help either with building enhancements or different things that are associated, like costs that are associated with moving to Miamisburg, and they're willing to commit to growing their employment by a certain percentage, which will then increase their income tax paid to the city, then we will forgive what was given to them, because we are in turn receiving even more money. And if they don't meet those requirements, then obviously that's something they're going to have to pay back. And it's been wildly successful. I think that we can attribute most of what's done on Byers Road to those kinds of programs. And I think that if we can apply that same logic on a state level, we're going to see those things change. To be honest with you, Jobs Ohio is just something that Governor Kasich is trying to use to promote himself. I don't think that it's been very, obviously it's not been very successful, and so I think that we really need to take a look at that.
Okay, do you have the questions? So here's what we're going to do with these. I will read them, and then I don't know how many we'll have. Yeah, since Zach didn't get to have any questions. Zach, if you're here, you want to pull up a chair? There's one over there, I think. And then what I'm going to do is when we read the questions, instead of answering them in the exact same order as we did with the first round, we'll start with, I'll name a person to start with, and then just hand the microphone to the person on your left, and then back up. That way we can get a little more, mixing it up a little more.
These are about school safety. Yes or no?
Okay, so I think we're going to start with Zach. And as I said, why don't we, Zach, after you're done answering Representative Antoni, if you could, and then we'll go down. Try to get some order in the chaos, but at least we can start with a different person each time.
Sure.
So do you believe arming teachers is a solution to school shootings, and why?
Yeah, well, no, I don't.
Did I say arming teachers?
Arming teachers?
I'm sorry. No, do you believe arming teachers is a solution?
As teachers and students, I'm not a huge favor of putting, if there's going to be a gun in the school, I would prefer it be with a school resource officer behind a man or a woman with a badge. So that's the first thing I would say. I think teachers would rather have a raise than a handgun. That's the second thing I would say. there are smart, common sense things we can do to protect people in schools. But I've heard folks make the argument that, you know, gun-free zones don't work. All it does is make you a soft target for someone to come in and commit violence. Well, you know, folks, those gun-free zones are not intended to prevent the mass murderers from coming in. Gun-free zones are intended to prevent law-abiding gun owners from bringing guns into places where they're not supposed to and having accidents. So I mean, you don't have to look very hard in the papers, and you've already seen stories about teachers that have started carrying guns. One was giving a safety lesson who was trained in how to use it, and the gun went off accidentally. The other one left it in a bathroom. You start down a really dangerous path if you start arming teachers, because then what do you happen when there's an active shooter situation? The police come in, and they don't know who the teacher is and who the gunman is, and the accuracy for a trained law enforcement professional to be able to hit a moving target with a gun is something like 18 or 20%. So you expect a teacher to be able to have something anywhere near that accuracy? It's the wrong thing to do. There are smarter, better ways to make our schools safer.
Well, thank you for the question. Lynn, as you probably know, current state law actually leaves it up to school boards right now, and that, I think, was passed in 2011. That's how I believe it should be. It should be up to local communities to decide whether they do that. Mad River, for example, chooses to, and Miamisburg chooses not to. And so, you know, right now it's up to each community, and that's how I think it should be.
I agree that the local communities should decide. I think you could have it where you have a mix too at the same time. You could have resource officers and you could have teachers who are well trained. I do not believe that students should be armed in any capacity. Let's not do that. Let's stay away from that. And I grew up in a small town, and I remember guys bringing hunting rifles in the back of their trucks and that sort of thing, but they didn't bring them inside. So let's keep it that way.
I think there are a lot of things we can do to make schools safer. Like, you know, I think most of the people up here with me, I know a lot of teachers here locally, there are teachers in my family who are very uncomfortable with the idea that they would be asked to carry a gun to school. And I think that we've made their jobs difficult enough by giving them so many restrictions from Columbus. So I think that, you know, like they said, if the school board chooses to implement that and makes it something that is optional for the teacher, and you have, I mean, we have some teachers who are former military and are highly trained and able to do that. And I think that if the school board is comfortable with it and the teacher is comfortable with it in certain circumstances, then that's something that maybe we should leave up to the local community side. But I don't think that that we should certainly institute a law or try to encourage teachers to carry guns. How about you next? Let's try that.
Okay. A question from the audience, I believe, or did we have? Okay. There are, on average, 15 veterans a week nationally who commit suicide. What would you do as a state representative to address the problem, and how would you personally reach out to help veterans in the community?
Did you want to start with me again, or do you want to start with somebody else?
Sure. That is certainly an issue that I think needs to be addressed. People talk a lot about the funding that has been cut to the VA and how they suffer. I have a friend who's an emergency room doctor at the VA and can tell me and talks about, you know, openly the struggles that happen there because they aren't well funded. They don't receive care. They overprescribe medication. There's a lot of work that needs to be done there, and I think that some of that happens on a federal level, some of it happens on a state level. But absolutely, that would be a priority for me as something to look to fix that broken system.
Yeah, taking care of our veterans has to be a priority. If we don't do that, if we don't help those who served us, then what type of society are we? And I think as state representative, I could absolutely seek to reform the VA and look into funding, but we should also promote private charities, try to get help, offer resources to people who need help. And we have to put our people first. If we're not putting our own veterans first and we're putting people in other countries ahead of them, that's not right. We can't do that.
Well, thank you for the question. Unfortunately, our veteran population faces various issues, including suicide, but homelessness and unemployment, which also may lead to, the high rate in suicide. Post 9/11, veteran unemployment is the highest amongst almost any group. It's over 11%. And so, all of those issues, I think, run together. The state has a Department of Veteran Services, which is, supposed to support the federal department. Unfortunately, I think they do have, some trouble in serving populations of veteran, issues. In my time in the legislature, we did implement a suicide awareness training in schools, but, a lot more can be done. But, hopefully, if we can address veteran homelessness and unemployment, that would then see a decline in, veteran suicide. But suicide in general, unfortunately, is a huge issue. I've been helping, a local parent through it, and had, she had some different issues with another school system, but, it is quite a tragedy, and we should do everything we can to lessen it.
I agree with all of that. See, bipartisan.
Okay, I've been asked to pass along the word from the Pooh Boss here. Try to limit your comments to about 30 seconds, if you could. Okay. Another question from the audience. What is your stance on abortion and why?
Where do you want to go with it?
Marcus.
So I'm pro-life. I believe that we should do a lot to encourage adoption. My parents adopted 2 girls when they were 12 and 14. And I understand there's situations where if you have diabetes, that type of thing, there may be a tragic choice that you have to make. I do support the heartbeat bill. I supported that. I think that's a good compromise. 7 weeks, 6 or 7 weeks is where a heartbeat can be detected.
Well, I'm proud of my 100% pro-life voting record by Ohio Right to Life. I'm also the only candidate in the race that was endorsed by Ohio Right to Life and the Right to Life Action Coalition of Ohio. I think that, if we're going to work on a lot of different issues, at the end of the day, if we can't protect life, then we really can't address, any other issue that we have at hand.
I too am pro-life, and I believe that the life of the unborn is just as precious as the life of those who, those of us that are already born and walking around. I think that, when I'm a state representative, I will also have a 100% pro-life voting record. So I'm proud to hear that Mr. Antoni has that, but I think that you'll see the same from Marcus and myself, should we be elected, that we would also have a 100% pro-life voting record.
Well, I guess this is one of the areas that probably sets me apart from my friends up here today. I really honestly believe that a woman should have a right to make her own health care choices. But I would really like to say that I understand where they're coming from, because I think everybody in this room is pro-life. There's nobody that's pro-abortion. Abortion is a terrible thing. Maybe that's my Republican parents rubbing off on me, but I'm a small government Democrat, and I don't want the government between you and your doctor.
So the next question is, what are you going to do about people texting while driving? Let's start with Representative Antoni.
Well, distracted driving is very tragic, as there are a lot of accidents and deaths contributed to that. It is actually, surprisingly, a very controversial issue at the State House. Right now, as you probably know, texting while driving is a secondary offense. You cannot be pulled over for it. There have been efforts into making it a primary offense. This is one of the areas that I'm not set on. I would love to hear from folks on what their opinion is, in the district, because it really is a controversial issue.
It definitely is. And I agree that we should do something about it. We should make it more serious of an offense. And texting while driving should remain illegal. It's not a good practice. It's unsafe. And let's encourage kids not to do it because kids are dying. And it's not good. Let's fix it.
It is. I heard a statistic recently that if you look at your phone, if your phone lights up and you look down to read a text, you have just in those few seconds driven the length of a football field without paying attention to the road. I think that's certainly a concern and something that needs to be really looked at. It's kind of a new problem. I mean, we've been dealing with it maybe for a couple years now, but it's something that we really need to look at statistics on and that the legislature, I think, probably needs to take some sort of action on. Right now, it is a secondary offense, and I think it needs to be reviewed whether or not that's the appropriate place for it to be.
I think a lot of this starts in the home. I think it's parents not using their phones in front of their kids while they're driving, and then talking to their kids before they start driving about safe driving habits. I've already started doing it with my nephew and niece. They're 9 and 10. I'm starting early because it is a real danger on the road, and I want it drilled into their heads right now. Don't look at your phone when you're behind the wheel.
All right, another question from the crowd here. Would you be in favor of a commuter rail system that would open accessibility for our community to get higher wage jobs in Columbus, Cincinnati, et cetera?
Well, that's a fantastic question. I don't know who asked it, but I used to live in Chicago, and I'd never really experienced using a train until I moved there. Ladies and gentlemen, if you can get rid of your car and you have really good public transportation, it's wonderful. I mean, you don't have to pay insurance or worry about gas or somebody dinging it when you go to the grocery store. So we're a long way from that. That would require billions of dollars of investment to be able to get there. But if we decided it's something we want to do, I fully support it. It would be great if we had that kind of public transportation here because it would attract jobs.
I totally agree with Zach. I think that it's something that we absolutely should be looking at. I think the fact that we haven't really considered it is one of the things that leaves us 40th in the country in a lot of those areas. I think that forward-thinking things like that can be done efficiently and without wasting tax dollars are the kind of things that we should really be looking into and focusing on, because to be able to commute or to attach the big hubs, Cleveland to Cincinnati in a quick way, I think would do wonders for attracting people and attracting business to come to Ohio.
I think everybody here hates traffic and hates commuting long distances. But yeah, we'd have to be careful as to who is profiting in that sort of situation if we were to invest in that. We should look at that. The government's role is transportation. That is a primary function of government. So yeah, we should look at it.
I would if it was privately funded. I don't know that we should have a direct state spending or expenditure towards that. But that said, if it is a job creator, just as any job creation project right now receives, perhaps a state incentive, they could surely receive the same consideration for that.
This is also from the audience. It's directed to the state representative, but it goes to all of you, actually. You've sponsored legislation that would put more people suffering from addiction in jail, even though we all know drugs make it into jails, and law enforcement personnel are not medically trained addiction specialists. Shouldn't we focus our efforts on treatment? And State Representative, you can answer
Okay,
first.
I'll try to do this in 30 seconds. Well, this is a specific House Bill 457, which was brought to me by a constituent. Tragically, her son, who was addicted to heroin, was on a heroin charge, had to see a probation officer, went in to see that probation officer, tested dirty for fentanyl. That probation officer let him walk home. 4 hours later, unfortunately, he overdosed and died on fentanyl. She felt, and I agree, that right now the safest place for that probation officer to send him would have been to a jail, and then to allow the family to be notified to set up longer terms and arrangements for him. But yes, in the immediate sense, right now jail is the safest place.
I don't agree that jail is the safest place. I don't think that's a good idea. I think we should throw the book at the dealers and then also look at Big Pharma and what they're doing. They're killing people, and it's a man-made epidemic. So if you're talking about throwing people in jail, let's look at the people in Big Pharma. Let's look at that. We need to make sure that we're being responsible and keeping our people safe.
county jail right now has a capacity of a little over 900. On a weekly basis, our local judges are meeting to release people early because the jails are overfilled. We are in the middle of a very serious opioid epidemic that is affecting hundreds and hundreds of people in this county. If we started putting them all in jail, we would have to ship people to Shelby County or other places, which we're already doing, because we cannot afford to house people for 30 days just because they have a drug problem. That is not a compassionate response. It's not an effective response, and it's not a cost-effective response. You know how much money it costs us to jail someone for 30 days simply because they're a drug addict is a ridiculous thing, in my opinion.
I understand the compulsion to want to help people that way because you see an addict that's using and they can't stop. However, when you put someone into jail for 30 days, you're forcing them through a detox. And when they come out, they are more likely to overdose when they use again because you haven't addressed their addiction problem. In that first 2 weeks, that is the most dangerous time for overdose for people. We should look at doing what Rhode Island does. They have a brand new pilot program that they've done. There are 3 drugs that treat addiction, methadone and 2 others that I can't pronounce, so I won't embarrass myself. But we should provide those to people instead of putting them in jail.
All right, another from the crowd here. If elected, how do you plan to overcome the divisiveness in politics and governing today? What would you do to bridge polarized groups?
I have the microphone. Yeah, I think that there are a lot of things that I care deeply about that are not Republican or Democrat issues. I think the 2 primary functions of government should be safety and infrastructure. Roads and bridges are one of the things that we need to focus on putting money into, and that's a bipartisan issue. Fighting the opioid epidemic is a bipartisan issue. I think some of the things that we are plagued with in this state are not things that come down to Republican or Democrat. They're things that we just need to work together to solve for the people of Ohio, because we're not doing it right now.
Cookies. No, you know, our last president, when he left office, he said in his farewell address to the nation, if you're tired of fighting with people on the internet, try talking to one of them in real life. There's a lady in my office I heard talking about how she voted for Donald Trump, and she was really excited after the election. So I went over to her and I said, Carmen, I didn't vote for Donald Trump, but I'd like to understand better why you did. Can I buy you lunch? And she said, yeah, and we went out and we had a conversation. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about, ladies and gentlemen. That's the attitude that I'm going to take to the State House. I'm going to talk to people on the other side of the aisle.
I agree. There needs to be a more civil discourse in our society, and we have to look beyond party lines to solve problems. If we don't do that and we're just fighting each other all day, nothing's going to get changed. I think the local and state level is a lot nicer than the federal. I think the federal level is in big trouble. That problem may never be fixed, and the media isn't helping.
Well, you know, luckily, you know, at the State House, you know, divisiveness is not as nearly as bad as, you know, the federal government and Congress. But, you know, we do, you know, have our differences. But, you know, we can find common ground on certain issues. I'm sponsoring a bill right now dealing with body cameras and public records with a Democrat in Columbus. And the bill has brought together conservative and non-conservative groups alike. Both the ACLU and the chiefs of police and sheriff's organizations have endorsed the bill. And so, you know, where we can find common ground, we should. And where we do have differences, we should talk about them in a very respectful manner.
Okay. This question is, please tell us about your job history with dates. Apparently, tell us about your job history, and I guess the person means about the time when you did that job.
How many years?
You will not be penalized if you cannot remember exact years.
Well, as you know, Lynn, I was elected very young. I graduated with my bachelor's degree from Ohio State in May of 2013, went to a year of law school. Unfortunately, after that, my predecessor, you know, passed away unexpectedly. I ran and was entered into office.
So let me think here. In college, I had a little house painting business, and I did renovations, that type of stuff. And after that, I worked for a real estate company. I did some marketing for some clients around Southwest Ohio. And then I worked for a small defense subcontractor in Beaver Creek. And right now I'm working a little bit for my parents' construction company, and I also do renovations on the side.
Thanks. Right out of college, I got a job at the Board of Elections where I worked for 2 years hiring poll workers. I left that job to run for office and took a job at that point as a business segment liaison with United Health Group. And I worked there for 7 or 8 years and in healthcare management, you know, and my career for the most part since then has been in healthcare management. I left that job to run a small business, which was a pediatric dental office in Centerville, and now work for a mid-level DSO. So I've done about 4 years in the dental field and about 7 years in healthcare.
Well, mine's pretty straightforward. I started working at LexisNexis after graduating from law school, and I've been there ever since. So that's about 10 straight years. So I had a job in sales, and then I did a little bit in market research. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm hoping that you'll give me a new job this November.
Okay, let's, I believe a gentleman named Thomas is asking this question. Schools are in testing time, 28 years of a bridge to nowhere. Testing leads to report cards, which rank and rate schools, reflecting more the background of students rather than the effectiveness of schools. ODE, Ohio Department of Education, I would assume they mean, wants to shift away from testing. Your thoughts on ODE and the shift?
Well, I don't think that schools should be about preparing kids for tests. I don't think that's a good barometer. I think schools should be about giving kids an education and skills that they need for the real world. Testing is something you can cram for at last minute and then probably do well at. But no, I think we need to focus on getting skills for kids.
Well, I would guess that question was asked by my friend, Mr. Thomas Wolf, former school board president of West Carrollton, so we'll recognize him in the audience. But, you know, look, Mr. Wolf and I have had these discussions over the years, and, you know, as both him and I know, we've had some success in cutting standardized testing, but still have, you know, more to go, and certainly we are still, you know, over-testing and over-diagnosticating our students. That said, you know, students do need to have some sort of assessment. There are various proposals out there, one of which I think is interesting, which would say, you know, every school district can come up with their own assessments, right? And empower the teachers and each community to assess their students how they want. And they would, of course, report that back to the state, but that would then empower the locals. 30 seconds is really
Yeah, I've already touched on this a little bit. I think that centralizing everything in Columbus isn't good for any local school district, and I think that we need to get to a point where we're comparing apples to apples, so to speak. We definitely have school districts that have been affected more by poverty and affected more by drugs, kids that are in foster care. There are some school districts that have 20, 30, 40% of their kids that have been through the foster care system, and with distractions like that, it's very difficult to perform well on tests, and I don't think that should reflect on the school district or on the teacher. So I think comparing schools against their own progress as opposed to schools against other schools is, I think, one of the important places to start.
I was reading the news today and looking at the different candidates for governor that have positions on this issue, and when I've got Mary Taylor in my corner saying we have too much testing in our schools and we need to dial it back, you know we're on the right track when we're all on the same page. The lady I was telling you about earlier that said she has the 17-year-old student that could tell you what's wrong with your car by listening to it, she summed it up rather succinctly. We need to let teachers teach.
All right, so we'll have one last question, and thank you all for all of these. We tried to kind of pick and choose so that we asked about things that hadn't already been asked. So. If you believe that the minimum wage should be repealed, does that mean you think people in Ohio are paid too much? And Sarah, I think it might be your turn to start.
No, I don't think people in Ohio are paid too much, so to speak. I think that the best thing we could do for business and for profitability is to let the open market dictate itself. We need to let businesses compete against each other and pay people what they are producing. I think that when we dictate what someone has to pay, we say that you have to pay $15 minimum wage, we're raising the cost of goods. We're lowering the ability for people who would qualify for those jobs to be able to get those jobs. So no, I don't think that any of those things are true.
We should keep the minimum wage. We need some sort of standard of living for people. There's too many pushes for cheap labor. And I've talked to folks in the Carpenters Union who said there's a lot of cheating, there's a lot of cash under the table. People are being paid illegally. So we should keep a standard wage.
Well, I agree with Councilwoman Clark. I think that wages should be determined by the market, that in fact by having a government mandated minimum wage in some industries, you are actually depressing the wage because you're allowing that employer to pay that employee that minimum wage instead of what the industry and what the market would then allow, which would be a larger wage. Now, wage stagnation is actually a huge issue in Ohio. You know, while we have seen increased job growth, wages have been flat throughout the Kasich administration, and I think I'm out of time, but that is something we really do need to address.
I do support a minimum wage, and it's one of the areas I would disagree with Representative Antoni. A minimum wage does not mean that somebody can't pay you more. It sets the floor, not the ceiling. So for folks that are working, you know, a minimum wage job probably wasn't intended to be your full-time employment. But if that's all you've got, because that's all that's available to you, I think a $15 minimum wage is a good thing so that you shouldn't have to live in poverty or work 3 or 4 jobs and still be struggling to get by.
All right. Well, thank you all for appearing before us and all of you for coming. Wonderful questions and your great listeners. Thank you. I apologize. I need guidance from the league.
We didn't do opening
statements,
so should we do closing statements?
Closing statements? I apologize for my omission. Go ahead,
Are
Sarah.
we gonna do this? Okay.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead?
Sure, yeah, thank you so much for coming out. I think it's exciting to be able to do this in front of an audience. Before, they've left now, but there was a group of girls in the back who are a part of a group that I have mentored for the last 7 years, and they're a great testament to, I think, what community involvement can do. That's something that I wish we had more time to talk about, because I think that a position like state rep, of course, your primary function is to legislate and do things to help the state statewide, but you also have the opportunity to have a bully pulpit, so to speak, to be able to encourage community programs, to be able to kind of influence what can happen on a local level to be able to deal with things like the drug epidemic. I think we've seen great, I've personally seen great success working with that group of girls, and I wish that I had more time to talk to you about that, but I hope you guys had a great time tonight. I'm really just thankful that you all are here, and don't forget to vote on May 8th.
Again, thank you everyone for coming out. My name is Marcus Reck, and I am 28 years old. I live with my wife and 4-month-old baby boy in Miamisburg, and we are very excited to have him. He's been a big joy, and I'm fighting for him because I want to make sure that he's confident to raise his own family here one day. And there's a lot of issues that we have to work through, and we have to work through together. We have to cross party lines to make some changes, and I mean, we're all neighbors at the end of the day. I would encourage you to check out my website. It's recforohio.com, and feel free to get in touch with me. I'm here to represent everybody, and I want to provide good service, and so everybody's voice is heard.
Well, I just want to thank Cox Media Group and the League and Miamisburg High School again for hosting this forum, and for all of you for attending and voicing your questions. It's been an honor to serve you for the last 3.5 years. You know, I'm proud of what we've done, and obviously we have more work to do, and look forward to listening and hearing your concerns the rest of the campaign.
So thank you again, all. I appreciate it. Thank you to the League. What? No, Zach did his earlier. He doesn't get to go again. I think we're actually done here. Thank you.